All right.
All right. Hello, Jenny.
Hey, Leslie.
So we are here to talk again, and I'm so delighted to see you and speak to you and get to catch up after it's been a couple of months, I guess.
Yeah, it seems like it's just been a couple weeks. I feel like this year is flying by.
It really feels like that to me too.
Hmm.
And so, for anybody who perhaps has been following this channel, you will recognize Jenny. We've had a couple of conversations previously about aspects of uh, counseling and counselor education that have been impacted by some of these ideological I don't know, influences in the therapy
Hmm.
field. And so we've had a couple of really great conversations about that. If you missed those, feel free to go back and catch up because I think that uh, I really found Jenny's experience and insight and analysis of those topics really interesting. And so it's a lot of food for thought. And Jenny reached out to me again recently because she's been thinking about branching out and working outside of the counseling umbrella as a coach and doing some coaching work. And so that's something that I'm doing myself. And I have spoken with a number of people who are choosing that route, typically moving away from having been a therapist, moving away from their license and going into coaching because they see perhaps opportunity for flexibility there that they don't see within therapy, or for actually just a variety of reasons. So I I thought it would be really interesting to hear Jenny's process, and what this looks like for her, why she's doing it, and what she hopes to achieve with this. So, Jenny, if you want to introduce that,
Sure.
I would love to hear.
Yeah. So I am keeping my license. I'm still doing clinical work. I really enjoy doing clinical work. But it just so happened that I had some terminations at the end of last year, which opened up my schedule.
Mhm.
And I wanted to do some other type of work in addition to the clinical work that I do. And I was really thinking a lot about our conversations and just some of the podcasts I've been listening to. And what I'm noticing is, well, one, there's a population that tends to not necessarily need services, but could benefit from them. So, kind of the worried well, people who for the most part are functioning just fine in life, but they would benefit from some support or accountability, from a listening ear, from a person who can help them clarify what's going on in their life and move them towards the life that they really want to live.
Mhm.
These are people who tend to not necessarily reach out for help because they're not in a crisis. They don't have a mental illness. They don't have symptoms that are negatively affecting their life, but they could still benefit from some help. And so, since I had some more availability and flexibility with my schedule, that allowed me to think about some options I could bring to the table for people like that. So I'm offering some individual sessions. I also am going to start some groups. I have a guided journaling group. So if you've ever wanted to journal or wanted to write and you, you know, you put pen to paper and then a block comes up, you can join the group and I'll have a prompt. We'll have a couple of minutes to write for each prompt, and then we can share. Just a nice way to get the creative juices flowing, to start writing things out. I think that we clarify our thoughts a lot by talking and by writing. Um, so that's a group that you could attend if you just wanted to get in touch with the creative side, or even just have a group that you meet with weekly where there is a little bit of conversation and then there's also some personal work as well, and not like in a really super deep personal work way, but just enough for somebody
Mhm. Mhm.
who just needs a little extra something.
Mhm.
um, and then I'm also going to start some kind of like book club slash accountability groups. The first book we're going to go through is 12 Rules for Life. I don't know all the books we're going to go through this year. We're not going to, my vision right now is that we would spend 4 weeks on a book. And so
Mhm.
that would be, every week we come together to talk about what we're learning, how we're applying this to our lives, some roadblocks that are coming up, and just have some peer support, some accountability, to really, again, move people towards the life that they want to live, be the people that they want to be, and show up responsibly in their lives. I think that there's a lot of self-esteem we can get from doing esteemable acts and from showing up as responsible adults. And that does not always get pushed in our culture all that frequently.
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah,
Wow.
so this will be kind of parallel for me.
Mhm.
So during the day, I'll do clinical work. I'm licensed in Illinois. I'm also licensed in Texas, although I'll probably let that license lapse once once I don't even know when the renewal cycle ends, but
Mhm. Mhm.
so yeah, I'll still do clinical work in Illinois. And then I also wanted to do something else for, there seems to be this population that is drawn to like your podcast or Benjamin Boyce's podcast, people who want to know that they can get help from somebody who's not going to be ideologically driven, who's not going to try to inject their views onto other people,
Mhm.
to project their views, not
Mhm.
inject. You don't want to inject things into other people. It's not good.
No, generally not. No, I think that's fantastic. And both of those groups that you're describing really appeal to me personally. I mean, I really
Mhm.
could see enjoying doing something like that. So I hope a lot of people will feel that same way, and you'll get some some great responses and some great participants who really are enthusiastic about that. I imagine you will, because
Mhm.
it's really something you're describing there as you talk about, and you use this phrase that I heard a lot during counselor training, the worried well.
Mhm.
And this
Oh,
was
that they get
talked
looked
about.
down upon in
It's
counselor
looked
education.
it totally is, yeah, and that really
Those
bugged
people
me.
don't need any help. Yeah,
Exactly.
actually, they do.
They do. They're us. They're the
Mhm.
people who are dealing with relationship issues
Mhm.
and identity crises and lifespan development challenges that throughout our lives we come against
Mhm.
obstacles and self-image issues and all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's just so
Mhm.
varied, and they don't have to be mentally ill
Right.
and mentally disordered in order to benefit from having somebody to help you do some pattern recognition and some clarification of self and clarification of identity and goals.
Mhm.
And so for me, as a counselor trainee, that was the population I wanted to work with. I always saw myself working with people who were fairly high functioning, but just experiencing normal life challenges. And
Mhm.
to hear that looked down upon, and to hear that. So one of the things that disturbed me about the medicalization of mental health is that, like we were told when we would work with a person to whom we were assigned in school. So we would randomly be assigned to other students in order to practice
Mhm.
therapy concepts or skills. Um, we were told to diagnose them, and you
Mhm.
were you were using the DSM, and you're offering a real diagnosis, and you're really going through the diagnostic process with this
Mhm.
person who is high enough functioning to be working as a
To not
mental
need a
health counselor.
diagnosis.
Yeah, and what we were
Mhm.
told is if you can't diagnose them, tell your instructor and we'll find a diagnosis for them, because there's a diagnosis for every person, and
Yeah,
you
and it would
cannot.
probably be adjustment disorder. Like,
Adjustment
that's kind of
disorder
a
is,
generic
yes,
diagnosis for
yeah,
people who are like, "I just started grad school and I'm really nervous."
yeah,
Okay, adjustment disorder.
adjustment
But
disorder.
really, is
Mhm.
that, do you want that in your, I mean, I hate to say permanent file, but like, do you want
Yeah.
that in your medical records that you have a mental illness when
Mhm.
you're just going through a transition in life that's difficult? Do you need a
Yeah.
diagnosis?
Yeah, and do we have to pathologize that? Do we have to
Mhm.
pathologize normal life events and normal
Mhm.
stresses? I got a divorce, or somebody died, or something. It could be so many things, and yet, yes, you're right. Adjustment disorder, not otherwise specified, stuff like that. It's just
Mhm.
this is your, and it's in order to smooth the way for insurance billing, because
Mhm.
the insurance needs to see the
There's a medical
ICD-10.
necessity.
Yep.
Mhm.
Yep. Which
Yeah.
also then opens up the possibility to prescribe, so that you
Mhm.
can go to the next, if your counselor can't prescribe, but somebody else can, and you've got this diagnosis. And so it's just this like medical pipeline, and it's
Mhm.
an over medicalization of a process that I think, like you said, for people who don't feel like they're in a crisis of mental health, why
Right.
would they want to avail themselves of that? And
Right.
they may have to if they want to seek a supportive talk therapist of some kind, because they
Mhm.
want to use their insurance. But
There are people who don't want to use their insurance because
yeah,
there's, again, if you're using your insurance company will have access to your notes.
Everything.
Now, hopefully therapists are writing notes in such a way that it's super generic so that your business isn't just out there for an
Mhm.
insurance company to see. That doesn't always happen.
Mhm. No, it's true. And, I worked for a naturopathic clinic for a number of years, and for a while, the insurances just wanted your CPT codes, which is your
Hmm.
procedure codes, and your ICD-9s at the time, then ICD-10s,
Hmm.
your diagnostic codes. But they started to request full notes at some point. So we would have to send in the full chart
Yikes.
notes for the patient.
Hmm.
And so, your insurance really does have access to as much as they demand to have access to. And you're not
Hmm.
notified of that as the
Hmm.
client or the patient. That's between the provider and the insurance company. And they could be providing full notes on you. And yeah, so I guess that's just to stretch out the point, but you're right that there's a population that would like the supportive service, but doesn't need or want the medical attention, the medicalization.
Right. And they don't need a diagnosis, they don't need a treatment plan, they
Mhm,
don't need services like that.
mhm,
Um, but boy, wouldn't it be nice to have some supports in place so that you can maintain your level of functioning,
mhm,
because life is really hard. You could be a caregiver to an aging parent, you could have a child who's transitioning from high school into college, you could have discord in your marriage. There may be multiple factors that are causing stress in your life or that are just difficult to deal with.
mhm.
And it would be really helpful to talk to somebody, but that doesn't need a diagnosis, or it doesn't necessarily need anything long term. It could be a peer support group that's helpful, it could be a couple of one-on-one sessions with somebody. um, but I just saw, after talking to you and after thinking about some things, that this is a population that a lot of times doesn't have services available because
Yeah,
they don't need it.
mhm. That's a
Which I
really good
get,
point.
compared to
Mhm,
somebody who has full-blown PTSD, yeah,
mhm,
that
mhm,
person really does need clinical therapy.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and it's a different kind of service environment
Yeah.
altogether. Yeah.
It's a different type of service. It's different needs and different services for those needs.
Mhm, mhm. And so you kind of envision this parallel career track for yourself. Do you want your focus to be mostly in group, or do you also offer individual sessions?
I do offer individual sessions. Yeah, I used to work in an outpatient psychiatric hospital in a what's called PHP or IOP program. So these are day treatment programs, for people usually once they are discharged from inpatient. So it's hard to go from inpatient back to normal life.
Hmm.
Usually you need something to bridge that gap.
Hmm.
And I loved running groups. And these, I mean, I did run therapy groups, but I ran a lot of psychoeducation groups. I used to do this guided journaling group sometimes at this hospital setting.
Hmm.
I really enjoy group settings. I miss doing that. I have no idea how I would even chart or bill for that in a therapy
Hmm.
realm. I
Hmm.
don't know.
Hmm.
So right now I'm looking at this primarily being groups, but I do offer individual sessions as well. And I don't know what the future holds. I don't know
Hmm.
how this may shake out.
Hmm.
2 years ago, I wasn't thinking of starting my own practice, and then I did. So,
Hmm. Hmm. So you're just being kind of open to
to whatever happens.
possibility as it unfolds.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what's the ideal size group?
Oh, probably about six.
Okay.
I would say 6 to 8.
Hmm.
That's
Hmm.
usually it's big enough where conversation can flow, but small enough where everybody can have a chance to talk.
Hmm.
How big are your solid ground groups usually?
It's still sort of new, so things are
Hmm.
still we're feeling it out at, or well, I guess it's different week to week, so
Hmm.
it's the I would say usually like
Hmm.
8-ish for mine, although I've had them get up. larger. We had a larger group this last week, was about 12. And then I
Mhm.
had to start, I wasn't able to admit people past a certain number. And we try to cap it at 10, really.
Mhm.
Isn't, if we are at 10, it feels like going beyond that sort of stretches the
Mhm.
ability for people to feel like they can really participate. But
Yeah.
I've had them be really small before, and that's really nice too.
Mhm.
4 or 5 people is really great.
Mhm.
So if
Yeah.
we consistently get to the point where we're having to turn people away, like we're hitting that maximum, and we're seeing that, we're going to start opening up more group times because we want to
Mhm.
be able to continue to facilitate this.
Mhm.
It feels like such a good um, experience for everybody involved. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Well, and I could also see with my groups, like a guided journaling group could easily have more people because a lot of this is I mean, I will, we're going to start with a warm up. Today I feel, and you write for 3 minutes and you put pen to paper and you just write, 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 write
Mhm.
until time is up. And then there's time to share if you want. If you don't have to. And then we go on to the next prompt. And as we go on, there'll be more time to write. So a lot of this is just personal, individual, doing your own writing and a little bit of sharing.
Mhm.
But when it's a book club, if we're working through a book like 12 Rules for Life or The Artist's Way, a lot of these are more interactive where you're trying to make some changes in your life. And for
Mhm.
that, I'd want room for people to talk about what they're doing, what they're learning from this book, how they're applying it to their lives,
Mhm.
some of the roadblocks they're running into, to
Mhm.
actually have some time to talk about that. So yeah, I would say probably no more than 8
Mhm.
would be good
And
for
I'm
that.
I'm picturing that you're probably going to do this as a closed group so that it facilitates the connection
Hmm.
between members, not a drop-in group.
Right. For the book
Okay.
club, it wouldn't be a drop-in group. For guided journaling, I could easily see that as a drop-in
Oh,
because
okay.
again, it's so into, you're writing most of the time.
Yeah, yeah, that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Hmm.
So, yeah, our solid ground groups are drop-in groups, so it's a little bit different flow. We don't know who will come week to week, and there's no commitment. So
Hmm.
you can come to as many groups as you like or as few, and you
Hmm.
just have access to them. So it's a little bit of a different model, not as
Hmm.
structured,
Hmm.
but it is fun. It's really interesting, and the group interaction is, um, I really like it. I'd love to have more experience doing it in a more therapeutic setting,
Hmm.
which I only got a little bit of experience with that in school, but it was enough to see that there's a lot of possibility there, and there's a lot of potential for real, I guess, real therapeutic benefits
Hmm.
from supportive groups like that.
Yeah. Well, and
And
I mean, if people have had, you think about difficulties people have in their life when there are ruptures in relationships or when relationships have not gone well, and that could
mhm,
include relationships with parents or family of origin. Um, you can have, you can heal some past hurts through having a really healthy, healthy boundaried relationship.
mhm. And it gives you that opportunity to experience that in a capsule
Hmm.
within this group, which is a boundaried setting.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Hmm.
And speaking of groups, you were talking. This is taking a tangent, but
Hmm.
you had some interesting ideas that I guess some things you've been chewing on lately about reality denial,
Hmm.
and you gave me an example. And do you, and it's another group, so I'll go ahead and share my screen in a second, and so we
Okay.
can talk about it. But would you
Hmm.
sort of start us off with a little bit of the intro to your thoughts on where we are
Hmm.
with denial of reality?
Yeah, sure. Um, so when I'm thinking about what's happening in our culture right now and some of the difficulties people are having in life, in my mind, there's a big part of this that's rooted in people's unwillingness to accept reality of life or to deny reality. Um, so I'll just give you a personal example. At the beginning of the pandemic, I was terrified because I had no idea what this was. And when my anxiety is really high, I tend to revert back to like obsessive compulsive tendencies. And so there was a lot of sanitizing everything. And there was like, this was socially, it was like socially acceptable OCD.
Mhm.
And as the pandemic went on, like that's just unsustainable. And I kept, what I came to realize was I had difficulty accepting the reality of the possibility of getting ill, possibility of dying. I mean, the reality of dying, it's going to happen.
Mhm. Mhm.
But there was part of me that really thought, if I do the, if I don't know, if I sanitize my bag of chips, or if I sanitize everything, that I can avoid this illness. And that's not realistic.
It
It's not a
becomes a
realistic.
ritual.
Right. And it's really this ritualized magical thinking that's helping you get through
Mhm.
the anxiety that comes from dealing in the real world, which is we are all going to get sick.
Mhm.
Um, and for some people, it's not going to be a really good time. But I also saw this denial of reality. There wasn't a push, with in 2020, that I did not see a lot of health professionals really talking openly to people about what they can do individually to help themselves have a healthier immune system, a stronger immune system to fight these things off.
Mhm.
That wasn't really discussed. That wasn't pushed on people. Like, get outside, get some exercise, take vitamin D. If you are heavier, change your eating habits so that your weight can be in a more normal or healthy range.
Mhm.
um, I didn't see that. And even with gender medicine, there's this push in our culture of like trans women are women,
Mhm.
trans men are men. Well, no, they're not. And it's not nice to tell people that they are. It's not nice to lie to people.
Mhm.
There are
Mhm.
people who really do have gender dysphoria to a point where it is negatively affecting their lives, to a point where it's incredibly distressing for them.
Mhm.
And to have a realistic conversation with those people of, let's look at all the factors that contributed to this. Let's
Mhm.
look at the different ways this is affecting your life, and what are some options to help you with this. One of those options might be hormones or some surgeries. That's one option.
Mhm.
And also know that with that option comes these risks, just like with another option of exploratory therapy, that comes along with risks too.
Mhm.
But there doesn't seem to be, I don't see people just grappling with reality in the way that I guess I think they should. I don't know. What do I know?
No, it's really interesting the way that you're describing this, because you're talking about, like, in the beginning of the COVID era, we had you said, like, socially acceptable OCD. It's almost like it was socially compelled OCD,
Hmm.
like you must engage in these things. Like, we now see that, um, the evidence was there all along, but it just piles up, piling and piling up, that masks were never of any real benefit.
Hmm.
And yet it was compelled and enforced that we
Hmm.
must engage in this ritual. The sanitizer that's everywhere, the sanitizing that we were doing, or people were doing before they touched their like you say, people would leave their groceries on the porch for so long before bringing
Hmm.
them into the house, and spray them down before they brought them in. And all these things were not only acceptable, but they were being endorsed and even compelled. And
Hmm.
yet they are of dubious value. They are psychological rituals that don't
Hmm.
that sort of give the individual or the community a sense of control, because just like with any ritualized behavior,
Right.
it's it's saying, I can't control certain things, but I can control this, and I can do
Right.
this, and this relieves my anxiety, as you say, because it's something that I can do. I can do these steps. And yet there are things that we can actually do that can't control, but can influence,
Hmm.
and can increase our make our odds better, like you
Hmm.
say, with improving your health, doing certain supplementation,
Getting
getting
enough
some
sleep.
sunlight, getting enough sleep. Yeah.
Hmm.
And so, but those are not the quick fix. Those are not the potent ritual. You can do this right now and feel better. Those are hard work and incremental And that's what we seem to really be moving away from, is that encouraging that kind of self-efficacy and that sort of agency in what we actually can influence within our lives, because that it still doesn't come with any guarantees.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, well,
the
yeah, there is no guarantee in life, and we're
Mhm,
all going to get sick at some point.
mhm, mhm.
Whether it's like I had COVID at the beginning of the year, it was a week where I didn't feel well. And I'm
Yeah,
grateful that it was the beginning of this year and not in 2020, in March of 2020, when it may have been worse. You know, the
yeah.
strain was different. Um, but yeah, we will all get ill.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, it's very true. And so this this kind of awareness that you've been, it's been an increasing awareness of like these ways that we are culturally engaging in some denial of reality, as you put it. Denial, it's like this
Hmm.
denial of mortality, denial of
Hmm.
uh, personal vulnerability, or
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Denial of the reality of sex, not
of sex,
like
yeah. Hmm.
having sex, but of like,
Yeah, yeah, human,
right,
dimorphism,
right.
sexual dimorphism. Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, definitely. And so it was within all of this framework that you are starting to receive like CMEs and stuff, like continuing education flyers and stuff. And this was one of the
Hmm.
things that you sent on to me. Do
Hmm.
you want to do you want me to share that and we can talk about it a
Yeah,
little
I
bit?
can do a
Okay.
little setup. So
Okay.
I got a flyer. I do some work with people who have eating disorders, and so I'm in the eating disorder treatment world. And I have very different opinions from a lot of what's pushed in eating disorder treatment. And so I got this flyer for it's a consultation group, and it's specifically for fat therapists.
Okay. Well, I'll pull that up here.
Hmm.
So I'm sharing my screen now, and this is the flyer that Jenny received.
Hmm.
I'm gonna kind of just
Yeah,
calling
I can
all
go
fat
through it.
therapists.
So
Yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
So it's a consultation group specifically for fat therapists. And I'm in a couple of consultation groups, and I find consultation groups incredibly helpful. I think it can be really helpful to be in a group of people where you have some kind of shared something, whether
Mhm,
it's, it's a consultation group just for therapists, or it's a consultation group just for EMDR therapists, or it's a consultation group for people who work with adolescents. So
mhm,
I can totally see why somebody who's fat might want to hang out with other people who are fat, who are not going to make comments about weight or size or what this person's eating, because that does happen to people. There are people who take all sorts of they take it upon themselves to judge how people look, and that has to suck. So I understand why people might want to get together with other people in who are also fat.
mhm,
um what struck me was that they're going to talk about existing caseloads, and they're using an anti-oppressive, queer, trans affirming fat liberation lens. And you and I, Leslie, have talked about how when people are trying to do therapy through those lenses, it tends to take people away from good clinical work, because they are seeing their clients or themselves in an oppressed or oppressor category.
mhm,
It tends to really narrow the scope of focus that you
mhm,
have. If somebody is coming in and they are distressed about something in their lives, if you are looking at it through some of these social justice lenses, you may end up looking at, how is a harm being done to you? Is, is somebody in your life oppressing you in some way? As
mhm,
opposed to, that can absolutely be happening. And there may be some things going on with you internally that are making your life difficult. This could be your thought patterns, this could be behavior patterns. These are things that can also lead to difficulties with mental health.
yeah,
And that gets pushed aside if
mhm,
you're just looking at things through a social justice lens.
Yeah.
So that stood out to me.
Well,
And
and it's the
then,
preset filters. If you're
mhm,
examining all of your clients through a preset filter, it really limits what you're going to uncover and find, and the way in which you're going to be biased around what you're uncovering and finding. It's like you are you're limiting your lens from the get-go, and
mhm,
how much utility is that going to be for that individual at that point?
right.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the other thing that stuck out to me was this flyer has one sentence about addressing clinical questions, and then underneath that, um, there's a lot of information about what it's like to cope and address anti-fatness
Mhm.
with clients and colleagues in organizations and professional networks, at trainings and events, and in the world. And so they're going to focus on personal and professional boundaries around anti-fatness, grappling with their own internalized anti-fatness, and applying fat liberation principles. So it sounds like the veneer is a consultation group for cases, but it really sounds like what's happening is this is a support group, which is fine if you want a support group.
Yeah.
But again, getting back to this push to deny reality, I work with people with eating disorders. So I've
Mhm.
worked with people at all ends of the spectrum. I've worked with people who are underweight. I worked with people who are very fat, morbidly obese. Um, there are medical issues and mental health issues that happen when people are under a weight that is healthy for their bodies. And there are also some medical issues that can arise when people are over the weight that is healthy for their bodies. And what I'm noticing is this push to deny what happens on this end of the spectrum. Any clinician that I've worked with will, I've never heard anybody deny the reality of problems that can crop up because somebody is underweight.
Yeah.
But there does seem to be a denial about problems that can come up when somebody is overweight.
Mhm.
Um, and
Which seems
addressing
like
that is
it's a pendulum swing, because it's saying, yes, we shouldn't be filled with body shame, and
right.
we
Yeah.
shouldn't hate ourselves because we don't fit
Yep.
some ideal. Yes, that's
Good.
true, and yes, we should
Hmm.
work on self-acceptance while we also navigate what our own goals are in terms of
Hmm.
our, not only our fitness level, our appearance, whatever our goals may be.
Hmm.
We should be able to work towards those goals without being riddled with shame,
Right.
and we should decrease the stigma. But also, do you throw all of that into this other camp and go completely to the polar side and say there's absolutely no concern
Right.
around
And that's
this
what I'm
issue?
seeing. I'm
Yeah.
seeing this belief of it's not fatness that's causing medical problems, it's anti-fat bias. And
Okay.
I know people who will not go to the doctor because they know they're going to get a lecture from their doctor. So
Hmm.
there is absolute truth in anti-fat bias that will affect a person's health if they're not going to seek out medical care when they need it.
Yeah.
That's absolutely true. And at the same time, if you're having difficulty sleeping because you're so large, and it, like, I've had clients tell me my breasts are so big it feels like I'm suffocating when I lie down at night.
Hmm. Hmm.
That person would benefit from weight loss
Hmm.
and would probably need to do it in a really careful way if they've had a long history of dieting, yo-yo dieting, if they have really black and white dichotomous thinking about food. There's a piece of that that's really rooted in some kind of mental illness. It would have to be done in a really safe and slow way,
Hmm.
but to deny that is not helpful. Like, I have a difficult time finding dietitians who are eating disorder informed who will work with people with intentional weight loss.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to find that.
Really?
Because
Wow.
yeah,
Because it's
because
so unpopular right now to want to lose weight.
right, because right now it's what I hear is I'll hear dietitians say, I don't do intentional weight loss.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow. I had no idea.
yeah. And so in my mind, I'll take a few minutes just to talk about some like eating disorder treatment history, but
Yeah.
um in the past, anorexia got so much focus, which makes sense. There's there's a high mortality rate. And these are people who can have major medical problems because of an eating disorder.
Mhm.
And and we live in a culture where thinness for the most part has been very highly valued, especially in the past. People would maybe come for help and they wouldn't be in a small body, they'd be in a more like a normal sized body or larger body, and then they wouldn't get the treatment that they needed because doctors would minimize what they were going through, they
Mhm.
wouldn't take them seriously. So there is a reason why some of this has come up.
Mhm.
But this some of what I'm seeing with health at every size, or some what I'm seeing with body positivity, it can be helpful for people who've struggled with a restrictive eating disorder and who tend to be very over controlled.
Mhm.
Having much more flexibility with food, having much more flexibility with your understanding of what a healthy weight is and what that means for you, that can be really helpful for
Mhm.
people like that.
Mhm.
For most people, um, intuitive eating or health at every size is probably going to lead to higher body weight that's not actually healthy for that person.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
again, I'm not throwing it all away, but
Mhm.
there are some people that it would be helpful for, and then there are a lot of people that it wouldn't be helpful for.
Well,
Um,
it's just like most issues when it comes to
mhm,
people and psychology and life are much more complicated than either all this or all that. It's
mhm,
really a more nuanced discussion that takes a lot of individual factors into consideration. And what you're describing and what this what the fat liberation principles and this whole movement around you know shunning the idea of intentional weight loss, it's very similar to the reality denial examples that you gave in the beginning of this dialogue,
mhm,
um, because it's taking the fact that we can't control certain things, and it's kind of distorting that through a ritualistic and psychological lens instead of giving people tools to actually maybe not control completely, because we have to let go of the idea that we can control everything, but to actually have some agency
yeah,
to make positive changes in their lives.
right.
Whether we can control it completely or not, we can make some positive changes. So to chalk it all
Mhm,
up to this is just a psychological dysfunction in the culture, we should not be discriminating, we should not see this as a negative thing. We need to change that so that it's just a
mhm,
positive thing
mhm,
without any regard for underlying health concerns.
right.
So it's just oversimplifying
Mhm,
and distorting things and denying reality.
mhm. Yeah, it's crazy making.
It is crazy
And
making.
I feel like, if I were to bring this up with some other eating disorder professionals I know, it would be like me trying to go into a Christian church and saying something like, Jesus Christ really is not your Lord and Savior. Like, it's just not going to go over
Yeah,
well. It's
yeah.
not going to, if you really truly believe this in your heart, nothing is going to persuade you.
Mhm.
And
Well, and
again,
there
like
is
I
this faith-based aspect to all of this as well.
Right. And I think my perspective is, I mean, not to pat myself on the back, but I think my perspective is fairly nuanced. But it would absolutely be seen as anti fat, and that
Mhm,
I would need to check
mhm,
my fat phobia.
mhm.
Um,
Yeah.
but I also know, as a person who, I'm I'm heavier than my body really would like to be. I know this, my knee tells me. My right
Mm,
knee tells me.
mhm,
Like, there are things that I know I can change that would make my life better.
mm,
And I had an experience a couple of years ago where, I decided to go see a dietitian, but it was an eating disorder dietitian. And so she was like, "This is great. This is fine. You're doing great." I'm like, "I don't think I am." And
mm,
then my doctor was like, "Oh, we can put you on this medication and you can come in
mm,
and get these
mhm.
infusions." And I'm like,
That's
"Where's the middle ground here?"
yeah, like, I don't wanna do either one of these things.
Right.
Yeah,
I don't want this like, "Oh no, you're
yeah,
doing great." I don't
yeah,
want that, but I also don't want to go on a medication.
right,
So yeah, I'm
yeah,
trying to find
some real talk.
right. Yeah, real people, like real clinicians or real providers who can just deal with the reality of life.
Yeah, I think that's yes, absolutely. And just one more thing I'm going to share. I'm going to share my screen one more time because this jumped out at me when I was looking at this flyer. And it's not a major point, but it just seems to tie in so well. Is like right here,
Hmm.
vaccine masks required for
Hmm.
this group. That's why. I mean, is this about health? Because now we know some things about this.
Hmm.
It's just again evidence-based discussions are missing from the equation. There's no, it's ritualistic and it's all being
Hmm.
distorted through a very uh I don't know. I'm gonna work on articulating this because there's a lot of thoughts that this conversation is bringing up that I'm struggling to really
Hmm.
put together in a smooth way. But I think that you've brought up something that is a really intriguing recognition of a pattern
Hmm.
that really helps to kind of crystallize what's going on
Hmm.
and what these different these seemingly disparate movements have in common and how it's a part of a larger cultural refusal to kind of come to grips with the reality of our mortal life.
Hmm. Yeah, or even, yeah, just the reality of life of like a man is never going to be a woman.
Yeah.
It's never going to happen. Now, a man who has severe gender dysphoria, severe enough where the risks of hormones or surgeries, this person's willing to take them on.
Mhm.
Um, those hormones and surgeries may end up helping this person navigate life better. That doesn't
Right.
mean that he's become a woman.
Yeah.
Um, it means he maybe appears more like a woman.
Mhm.
And absolutely, nobody should be bullied or ostracized um, or targeted or harassed. Um,
No.
but again, that person is not a woman, and there is something to be said about the reality between men and women and that need for single sex spaces, and that
Mhm.
there's a reason we have this.
Mhm. Yes, and within within that idea, there's the idea. So, just as a person shouldn't be targeted, bullied, harassed for their choices and the way that they want to live their life, also that just because that's true, it doesn't make it true that people who have trouble accepting this or don't want to accept it or barely tolerate it or have their own feelings around it should be targeted, bullied, and harassed. I mean,
Right.
there's a there's this like this thread that goes from acceptance to from tolerance to acceptance to embracing,
Right.
and we
To
are
you are
jumping.
compelled
Yeah,
to, and if you're not, or celebrating, and if you're not celebrating, well, that means
celebrating.
that
Yes,
you're against that
I
group.
think that's a better word, celebrating. So tolerance, acceptance, celebration.
Hmm.
So we are skipping the idea of tolerance or even acceptance in a lot
Hmm.
of these cultural issues, like you said about your views on weight as it relates to health.
Hmm.
Very nuanced.
Hmm.
It's a really complex topic. You give it a lot of compassionate thought, and you don't fall down on one side or the other. You fall down on the side of the individual making their own choices with full
Hmm.
informed, you know, uh, information available to that person. And
Hmm.
yet there are people who would look at that and say that's fat phobic. And that's
Hmm.
because they aren't seeing that middle ground of acceptance and and nuance. They're jumping straight over to you're not celebrating it, so therefore you are intolerant.
Hmm.
It's like a false equivalency. And
Yeah,
it's happening
it's
all over the place with gender,
right.
with all these topics.
Yeah, it's us versus them.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
so if you're not with us, then you're against us.
Hmm.
Um, and there may be some people who aren't with your group, and that doesn't mean they're against you.
Yes, yes. Well said. I think that it's really in line with my perspective on this as well. It's just that we don't have to allow ourselves to be polarized.
Hmm.
just because we don't agree with one side of an argument doesn't mean that we are on the other side of the argument. Sometimes we can see a
Yeah.
little bit of both, and sometimes we're somewhere squarely in the middle.
Yeah. And that's one of the things I want to do, especially with book club, is talk about what we disagree with.
Hmm.
You know, if we're reading a book for, you know, personal development or self-help, there may be some really good nuggets of information, some things that are helpful, and there may be some things that we disagree with, and
Hmm.
that's fine to have a space where people can disagree with the author, people can disagree with each other. We don't have to take it personally, we don't have to get offended. It could be okay just to talk about it and to have a difference of opinion,
Hmm.
and to not have to feel like you have to die on a hill.
Yeah, I think that's great. I think that's missing in um, a lot of these conversations. So I think the people who are come to your groups are really going to benefit from being able to engage that way.
I hope
And
so.
I hope it's really a good experience for you and for your clients. And I will put in the notes beneath this video all the links where you can find Jenny and find what she's doing. Do you want to go ahead and say them out loud as
Sure.
well?
Yeah. So if you're interested in coaching, I do coaching nationwide. So anywhere in the States, I do it primarily through Zoom, but you can find me at realtalkwithjenny.com. I'm also at realtalkjenny@gmail.com. If you're in Illinois or Texas and you're looking for therapy services, you can contact me at my email info@jennyrogerstherapy.com. And then my website for therapy is jennyrogerstherapy.com.
Excellent. Well, I really applaud what you're doing, and I think it's fantastic and really going to benefit your clients. And
Thank you.
I am so glad that you shared it with us here. And I really look forward to checking back in with you at some point in the future and hearing how it's been going for you and what your experience is like. Because we can talk more about the contrast, like what similarities and what differences are you finding in
Hmm.
doing the clinical work versus the coaching work. So
Hmm. Yeah, I
and
appreciate your time. I have enjoyed all of our conversations. I love following your YouTube channel. I was listening to you and Christine talk today. It's been really nice. So I really appreciate what you're doing in this space.
thank you very much, and thank you for being a part of it.
Thanks,
And
Leslie.
yeah, thanks, Jenny.